Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Chances are if you clicked on this video, you're either experiencing some symptoms now or have recently had a heart attack. If you're experiencing some symptoms now, I would encourage you to get medical attention now without delay. You know, as my cardiologist was wheeling me back to the cardiac cath lab on the day that I had my heart attack, he explained to me that time is muscle, heart muscle that is. You know, I had ignored some early warning signs of heart disease and fired a couple of cardiologists along the way. And this is my story of how having a heart attack at age 42 affected road cycling and Peloton.
The opinions or information in this video should not be taken as advice in any form, medical, financial, legal, or anything else. Please pause the video now to read the rest of the disclaimer or read it in the show notes.
While I was in the hospital, they only put one stent in, and I did have some blockage in another more minor artery, but it wasn't bad enough that they needed to stent it in an emergency situation. It's about 4.5 years later now, and I haven't had any more problems, so hopefully that one can do without a stent is what I'm hoping. It's a few days after I shot the original video, and I'm editing it now. And last week I'd had a nuclear stress test done because I was having just a little tiny bit of pressure here when I was walking, but not really under load or anything. And I mentioned it to my cardiologist, and he said, hey, you know, it's been 4.5 years or so since you've got the stent. We could do a nuclear stress test to make sure everything's all clear. So I did that, and I got the results back, and he said everything was A-okay. He saw no abnormalities, and that other blockage that I was a little bit worried about looks like it's fine, and I have the all clear. So I just wanted to follow up with that little tidbit, so good news. It was just a couple weeks before my 43rd birthday, and I was out on a bike ride. It was a road bike ride, and I was riding with the normal group of guys that I ride with who are much faster than me, so I'm usually falling behind, and I could not get my heart rate to come down below 180, and something felt a little bit off. I'd been on vacation for a couple weeks, hadn't eaten very well, gained a few pounds, had worked out a little bit on vacation for the couple weeks, but not a lot. And so anyway, I just told my buddies, I said, you know, I'm going to head back to the house. We were about 5 miles out. So I headed back to the house by myself. I wasn't experiencing any pain at all. I just had sort of a little bit of a tightness, couldn't get my heart rate to come back down. And as a cyclist, I'm acutely aware of what my heart rate does normally. And I was on flats where it shouldn't have been high, and it was pegged out at about 180 and just would not go down. So I bailed out on the ride, and now I'm really glad that I did. I think more than likely what happened, from what I understand, is that I probably had about a 30% blockage or so and had a plaque in my left anterior descending coronary artery, which is also known as the widowmaker. And those things can rupture and break open, and when they do, they're kind of like a butterfly valve. So when it's one way, it would be open, and then once the plaque ruptures, it's kind of like a flap that can flap out into the main bloodstream, and then instantly you get a lot more blockage. That's dangerous in itself, but that didn't block me up all the way. I could still ride the bike at that point. So that started a clotting cascade that would have killed me. I'll go back to the bike ride. So I went back to my buddy's house and sat around with them and had a beer, I think. And then I live real close to there, so I rode my bike home. And felt weird. Went home that night. That was probably got home about 8 o'clock that night. Went home, felt weird all night, kind of had some palpitations and probably some arrhythmias. Felt a little weird, but nothing scary weird, just a little odd. Got up, went to work the next morning, and I have a little hill that I have to walk up to go to my office. And I walked up that hill, and I was feeling, again, a little funny, a little odd. And again, no pain or anything, just felt really weird. So I got to my office, started doing some emails, whatnot, taking phone calls, and I started feeling back to normal. But of course, all this stuff's on my mind, and you know, at this point I'm in denial. I don't think I'm having a heart attack. I had ridden my bicycle 1,500 miles, and this was in July, so I had ridden it 1,500 miles that year in July, and I didn't think I'd be the guy having the heart attack. So anyway, lunchtime rolls around and I decided to go back down to my car and repeat that walk up the hill to see if I had any problems. Well, I didn't. So I kind of thought I was in the clear. Wasn't having any more symptoms. And about 2:30 that afternoon, I had to give a presentation. Really, I was the co-presenter. Another guy and I were presenting, and we were in our director's conference room giving this presentation, and then I started getting actual chest pain. And I wasn't nervous about the presentation or anything. I'm guessing the clotting had just started to occur, or it was getting to a point where it was getting serious, rather. And like a lot of people, I did not want to have to excuse myself in the middle of that presentation. I was embarrassed, so I just gave the presentation. I headed back to my office about 3:30, and that's for sure when I should have called it quits. I was having major pains in my office, but I'm a big chicken when it comes to medical stuff, and what I think happened is I would scare myself about thinking that I was going to go to the hospital, and I would scare myself, and I'm guessing I would get an adrenaline rush or epinephrine rush, which would cause vasodilation, which would make the pain go away. Well, of course, every time that happened, I was thinking I was cured, and I kept trying to talk myself into thinking that I was having a vasospasm. And I knew I'd have to go to the doctor, but I didn't realize it would be quite as acute as what was going on. Well, like a real idiot, I finished out the workday, and I only live a few miles from there, and I tried to drive on home, which was real dumb. And I only live a couple miles, like I said, and I was in a lot of pain by the time I drove in my driveway. I immediately went inside the house. I knew I was going to have to go to the hospital at this point. Laid in my easy chair for just a minute, and I was moaning. And my wife said, "I've never seen you moan like this before. We're going to the hospital right now." And so I said, "Okay, let's get in the car." She drove me to the hospital. Luckily, we live very close to a hospital. I walked into the emergency room in quite a bit of pain, and I said the magic words, "I am having chest pain," which, believe it or not, they didn't put me right in a room. They still handed me a clipboard, and we started filling out some paperwork. But luckily, within 1 or 2 minutes, I was in a room. And then people were rushing around. They brought in a cardiologist. They hooked up an EKG immediately, put an IV in, did some blood, and they called in a cardiologist who was not there immediately. I mean, he was there within probably 5 or 10 minutes, but he wasn't there when I first got in the room. And the ER doctor was trying to convince me that I was having a heart attack. And at the time, I didn't want a stent. So I kept telling him, "I do not want a stent. Please don't give me a stent." And finally, the cardiologist got there. He looked at my EKG, and he showed me the classic Tombstone sign on the EKG, which is what they call a STEMI. That's an ST segment elevated myocardial infarction, which is a fancy way of saying you have this certain pattern on your EKG that's indicative of you having a heart attack. And this is a really known bad pattern on the EKG, and that's why they call it the Tombstone pattern. So my cardiologist said, "Hey, I've done hundreds of these, if not thousands. I've seen this case present itself many, many, many times. And if we get to the cath lab and I'm wrong, you can tell me that I told you so. And I'll be happy to be wrong. But I'm pretty sure you're having a heart attack. You're probably going to need a stent. And we're not going to put a stent in you today so you can ride your bicycle faster or better. We want to put a stent in you so you don't die today." And after doing research after I got home and whatnot, I think he was completely right. I think I would have died that day rather. So they rushed me back to cath lab. I was shaking like Scooby-Doo when he sees a ghost, when he jumps up in Shaggy's arms. And I went to the cath lab, and honestly, it was not traumatic at all. I mean, other than I was scared senseless. But like, I was expecting it to be painful and bad and super scary, and the whole event was scary, but cath lab was not any more scary than what I was already going through, to be honest with you. And I was hardly in any pain at all. It was really, once I got laid down on a table, I wasn't in any pain. I was cold because they had me naked or close to naked, and that was cold in there, but I was not really in much discomfort. Funny story, by the way. My cardiologist is working on me, and he's got an assistant to his right, and they are on my right side too, and the assistant is by my foot. And for some reason, the guy rubs up on my foot with his leg, which
guys typically think that's pretty awkward. And I thought, well, he thinks it's the table. So I wiggled my foot thinking, when I wiggle my foot, he's going to move. No, he didn't move. So it was awkward, but anyway, I got through it, and that was the most awkward part. So anyway, they put the stent in, and I stayed the night in the hospital and got out the next day.
I'd mentioned earlier that I had fired a couple cardiologists, and I'd actually had my ejection fraction tested before when I saw one of those cardiologists. And after I had the stent placed and healed up, luckily for me, I had about a 0.5% to 1% better ejection fraction, which I know it's probably within the margin of error of the test, but hey, it made me feel better. It's much better than it being the other way around. So how did this affect my road cycling? The biggest way that it affected it is that I probably do more of my training now at a lower heart rate. And that's just on me. Within 6 months of having the stent placed, I had the all clear from my cardiologist to go basically full bore. He didn't want me to do that for quite a while, but after 6 months, I had no problems at about 90% of my capacity. And so he said it was fine to go ahead and go on up. So the good news is since I had the heart attack back in 2016, I have broken several of my pre-heart attack personal records on Strava. So that's been a big deal. I have lost some weight, and I've been fighting that very hard ever since 2016. The thing that I found that worked for me on weight was intermittent fasting, also cutting out drinks that contain calories. I'll have a few of those a week now, but it's a choice to have that and not the default. I might have 4 or 5 of those a week rather than probably 10 or 15 a week, which what I was having before. I also cut most of the French fries out of my diet. I love French fries. I'll still eat a few, but again, it's not the default. It's the exception rather than the rule. I've got a digital scale I use for weight loss tracking, and that's been a big help. One of the other key factors is that I don't go crazy when I'm not fasting. I typically fast about 14 to 16 hours a day. And then in that non-fasting period, a big key is just don't go crazy and eat a ton, which really I haven't even wanted to, so that's worked out fine. I've finally got my cholesterol under control. You might wonder about what my cholesterol was like before I went in. My numbers were on the high normal side, but they weren't really in the needed to treat group. Since I had the heart attack, I told the cardiologist that I wanted my numbers to be stellar. So we have me on a atorvastatin 80 milligram dose, and I have no side effects from it that I can tell, and my numbers are now stellar. They're basically off the charts on the good side. So that's kind of where I'm at now. On Peloton, I tend to ride lower heart rate rides again. I will still train up as hard as I can go occasionally, but I'm spending a much lower percentage of time doing that than I did prior to the heart attack. I trained at a lot higher heart rate, and my thought is that I'm afraid of blowing another one of those plaques open like I did on the first one. So that's the big reason I'm training at a lower heart rate. I'm trying to get where I can produce more power at a lower heart rate. And also, I have found a cycling supplement that seems like it opens me up. It's Beat Elite, and I've got a video. I'll put a link in now in the video if you want to look at that. It's the only supplement that I've actually really found that works for me, and it's amazing for me. It feels like it's opening me up. I told somebody I felt like I got a heart transplant because it's just amazing. One other thing I thought I'd cover, some people might want to know family history. My grandfather had a heart attack, but not till he was like 60. And then my grandmother also had angina. I don't think she actually had a heart attack, but she had some chest pain quite often. They thought it was heart blockage. My father actually ended up having a heart attack, but not till he was like 68. So, I thought that I was kind of dodging the bullet because I've lived a more healthy lifestyle typically than he has. And I thought I was off the hook since he hadn't had one, but it wasn't the case for me. So anyway, I hope you guys found this video useful. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done that. And you can tell me what you think in the comments. If you've got any tips or helpful hints, that would be great. Thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.